All right, chapter 25, verse 1. We covered a lot of this last week, but there was a little bit that we didn't that we're going to move into to move on. So we have Abraham took another wife, whose name was Keturah. She bore him Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan fathered Sheba and Dedan. The sons of Dedan were Asherim, Letishim, and Leumim. The sons of Midian were Ephah, Epher, Hanok, Abida, and Eldaah. All these were the children of Keturah. Abraham gave all he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines Abraham gave gifts. And while he was still living, he sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the east country. So what we see here is Isaac, of course, inherits everything. He's the true son of the promise. So he inherits the promise, the land, and the bulk of the wealth that Abraham had. But he also gives gifts to Keturah's kids and to Ishmael, remember him. And so Abraham gives them gifts. And so when it's all said and done, I'm sure Isaac was far less wealthy than Abraham was because of the gifts he gave out. But you'll see as we go through that God blesses him just like he did Abraham. And pretty soon he's even wealthier than Abraham was. So God really blesses him. Now, I'm sure Abraham gave them really great gifts, animals, money, that type of thing. And then he sent them away. He wants them away from Isaac because basically he doesn't want them intermixing. The children of Isaac are the sons of the promise, and that's the people that are going to make up the nation of Israel. So the others are to go off to other places. So let's see. And then Isaac inherited everything else. And all it tells us is they went east to the east country. Doesn't really define it so much more than that, but east is pretty much where Jordan is today and then Saudi Arabia. That's the area that they went to. So we know that the one of the sons was named Dedan. And so there's a city here in this area that's east of Israel, east and south, but still east, called Dedan. So we know that they pretty much went into this area. Now it says Edom there. If you remember later, that's Esau. Esau creates the nation of Edom through his lineage. So that's why it says that there. But they moved here. And remember, Ishmael's descendants went into Saudi Arabia. So basically, almost all of the sons of the other two wives went into the area that we know as Jordan and Saudi Arabia today. And of course, we know that the Arabs trace their lineage back to Ishmael because, again, they come from Saudi Arabia, with probably some mix of these other sons from Keturah as well, because they're all in that same area. And so they end up on the Arabian Peninsula, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. And it's funny that those are the nations that pretty much hate Israel and want to wipe it off the earth. So, all right, let's see, Now, 25, verse 7, chapter 25, verse 7. Oh, that's good. The fan that blows my papers. These are the days of the years of Abraham's life, 175 years. So Abraham lived a long life. Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of years, and was gathered to his people. Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, east of Mamre, the field that Abraham purchased from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with Sarah his wife. After the death of Abraham, God blessed Isaac his son, and Isaac settled at Beer Lahai Roi. I really like the way verse 7 is worded, because remember I'm always telling you that I'm a literal believer of the Bible, that we need to take the words literally as they're given unless there's some evidence that says to take it as an allegory or something of that nature. And notice how it describes Abraham's life. It uses this strange phrase. These are the days of the years of Abraham's life. Normally you would either say these are the days or these are the years, but it says the days of the years. And the reason it does that is because it's being very specific. All of this narration we've read up to this point has informed us of the important events of Abraham's life. Those are the days. They're the important days, and we would call that the days of his life, the ones that were important to be written down. Remember the soap opera, The Days of Our Lives? That was the point there, is it's about the events that happen in these crazy people's lives. And so instead of just saying the years of the days, it tells us what we've just read are the important events of the years of Abraham's life, and he lived to be 175 years old. Now, a lot more things, of course, occurred in those 175 years, but these are the ones that were important because these are the events that have to do with the formation of the nation of Israel. Remember, everything in here is about Israel. But also remember that everything in the Old Testament points to the New Testament. Jesus is the fulfillment of the entire Old Testament. And we'll see that a little bit later as we get to some other passages. Now, since he lived to be 175, that means Isaac was 75 and Ishmael was 89. So Abraham got to see his sons grow up, make it to a decent age, and have their own kids, that type of thing. And it's Isaac and Ishmael that get together to bury their father, even though they don't really get along. Ishmael does not like Isaac at all. At least in the past he hasn't. It's interesting that the sons of Keturah aren't involved. It's just Ishmael and Isaac are the ones that go and bury him. And they take him to the cave that he bought from the guy that's in what we know today as Hebron. And so here's a map of the area. There's Hebron. That's where and Mamre, that's where the cave of Machpelah is. That's where Abraham is buried, Sarah is buried, and a lot of others are buried. Jacob is buried, that type of thing. So they're in the same place. And in just a short little blurb here, we're told that God blessed Isaac, meaning he treated him as he had Abraham. And Isaac becomes very wealthy. As we go on, you'll see that he becomes extremely wealthy as well. Now then, it also tells us that Isaac ended up going to Beer Lahai Roi, which is down here. So he went from there to here, and it says that he settled there. Let's see. So he chose to settle at this, and there's a well there, if you remember. And what's this name should kind of ring some bells in your head. Because remember when Hagar ran away when she was pregnant because Sarah was being so mean to her? That's where she went. And she named it. Beer Lahai Roi means the well of the living one who sees me. Because remember God told her to go back and your son's he's gonna live and he's gonna have 12 sons of his own. And he's gonna be a big nation as well. And he even tells her to name him Ishmael, which is God hears. Because God heard her and then acted. So, verse 12. These are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son. So notice we're naming off, as Abraham dies, we're listing off all these different sons and generations that come from him. And part of that is, remember, God told Abraham, you would be the father of many nations. And it's interesting that that's not really brought out much. We're always told, Abraham's the father of the nation of Israel. Well, he's the father of a whole bunch of nations, not just Israel. What we know is Jordan and Iraq and Saudi Arabia, and that whole area is pretty much populated by his descendants. And it's exactly as God said. He would be the father of many nations. So, these are the generations of Ishmael, Abraham's son, whom Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's servant, bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, named in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, and Kedar, Abdeel, Midsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Timah, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names, by their villages and by their encampments, 12 princes according to their tribes. These are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. He breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people. And see right there, remember we said with Abraham, these are the days of the years of Abraham, because we have a whole narrative listing those important days. With Ishmael, we don't have any of that information, so it just says these are the years. It doesn't say the days. Because again, the Bible is very literal and very specific. So these are the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. He breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people. They settled from Havilah to Shur, which is opposite Egypt, in the direction of Assyria. He settled over against all his kinsmen, which also we'll see in a minute is the fulfillment of a prophecy that was given when he was born. So this is the area they went. They're not exactly sure where Shur was in some of these areas, but they inhabited this upper area of Saudi Arabia as well, which is much of the same area that the sons of Keturah went to. And then they spread down into Saudi Arabia. Now this was prophesied back in chapter 16 Remember, before he was even born, when God was talking to Hagar, he said, he shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone. He won't get along with anyone. And what do we know about the Arabs today? They don't get along with anyone. And everyone's hand is against him. And because of terrorism, the whole world is against Islam, which is the Arab religion. And he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen. And what we just read was the fulfillment of that. He dwells just to the east against his kinsmen. And all right, verses 19 to 21. These are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham fathered Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel the Aramean of Paddan Aram, the sister of Laban the Aramean, to be his wife. And Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife, because she was barren, and the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah his wife conceived. All right, so Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, which in that day was not unusual. Men a lot of times didn't get married until their late 30s and early 40s. Larry?
I'm sorry, I forget, does it say who Ishmael took for a wife?
It does later on. He took Canaanite women, which upset his father a lot. I think it was, maybe that's Esau. No, that's Esau. No, I don't think it does tell us who Ishmael took as a wife. All we remember is it said that his mother got him a wife from Egypt, is all we know. She's Egyptian. But who she is, we don't know. At least I don't believe we do. Let's see. Now, most likely Rebekah is much younger than Isaac, probably in her teens, like 15, 16, 17, somewhere there, which was very common. That seems terrible to us. It's like, he's old enough to be her dad, that kind of thing. But in their day, it wasn't. It was very common. And to this day, in places like Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, it's still common for very young girls to be married to much older men. Now, in today's world, it is kind of sick because it's not necessary. In their day, it was somewhat a necessity that they did this, is the reason they did this.
What was the necessity?
I'm getting there. Okay. The necessity of the girls being very young to men that were much older.
No, I say, what was the necessity?
Okay, the necessity is that, if I can get my page turned here. I swear there's 2 pages here. Was that it would take about that long for a man to be well established in his career and to be a good provider and to be able to have a home for her to go to where she would be taken care of and have what she needs is a big part of it. Now, another part of it is not something they knew, but maybe subconsciously they knew it. We all know that women mature faster than men. All the women will nod their heads to that.
Yeah, I agree.
Because they're mature, and usually they're acting much more mature in high school. The boys are still acting like they're 5. Sometimes they're still acting like they're 5. So that's part of it, is the fact that men mature much later. Now, Debbie and I discussed this many times in our marriage, which our anniversary is tomorrow.
Yeah.
Now I have to remember how many years it is. It's 42 years.
800.
That was your first husband. 42 years. So, when I can remember even way back early in our marriage, we used to discuss the fact that most men should not get married till they're at least 25. Because they don't even know who they are or what they fully believe. If you really sit down and talk to them, they really don't. So now they've done studies, and in scientifically, men don't really mature psychologically till they're 43. I mean emotionally, and most women would say, and some of them, never mature emotionally. But women mature at 32. Okay. Notice that men emotionally mature at 43, and in ancient times, most men got married around 35 to 45, which is kind of interesting. Okay. Now, of course, we know this one right here, that some men never mature.
They pretend.
I have a term for that. They are called, what's the term I used to use? They're not men, they're adult males. Because they're still kids. And you see that a lot. When I see a 40-year-old guy going down the street on a skateboard, I'm a little concerned, that type of thing. And you see a lot of those guys around that they never get out of the teenager stage, really.
I think that's because he lives in the garage, so there's no place
Exactly.
for his car.
Well, and a lot of times you don't mature till somebody makes you. Like get out of the house and get a job or live in a dumpster, that type of thing. So now the other issue was that childbirth was very difficult and very dangerous, all the way up until we started getting modern medical ability to intervene with C-sections and different things. And so it was the number one cause of death of women all the way up into the 1800s and 1900s was childbirth. And that's why most men, when their wife got pregnant, they were excited. They were also totally scared to death because there was a good chance she would die in childbirth.
What was the reason for that? Infections?
Childbirth is just a tough thing. Breech babies, all kinds of things. Babies that are too big, that's why we do C-sections, things of that nature. It's just a very, very difficult and dangerous time physically. And then there's all the things that can happen, blood pressure, blood sugar that women get when they're pregnant, that in modern times we can deal with. There's also can't remember what causes it in there, form of toxicity that also can happen when a woman's pregnant, as I recall, but I can't remember what it's called, but same thing, there's just a lot of ways to die from childbirth, not only is it painful, and also lifespans weren't all that long because life was so hard, back then women worked like mad from daylight till dark every day, plus had the kids, and all that type of thing. And so their lives weren't all that long, plus disease and all that. Back in that day, you could cut your arm and die from it because of infection, until we got antibiotics. I mean, you could cut your finger with a small minor cut and you'd end up dying from it because of infection. So also, how many kids did they have? Lots of kids. And you need to be young and strong for your body to have 10, 12, 14 kids.
Yeah,
So those are the reasons why it seems weird to us, but it's really not. Not in their day, their culture, and their circumstances for a young woman to be married to a man that was already established, already had his career set, so on and so forth. And remember, the parents were the ones that set up the marriages. And they're not about to marry their daughter to some guy that doesn't have a job or barely has a job or whatever the case may be. They're going to look for somebody mature, established, and so on.
My dad grew up in a family of 13 children. The father became an alcoholic, and my dad, at 13, took over the family.
Oh, yeah. That's very common. Absolutely. So they needed all of that. Now, what's interesting here is all of a sudden there's a little shift that if you're not really paying attention, you won't catch, but it has enormous implications all the way into the New Testament. And it's right here in the beginning. Remember I told you Genesis basically contains all of the foundational principles of the Bible. And we see one here that comes out to us. As we are creating the nation of Israel. Doesn't exist yet. We are in the process of creating it. Okay? So, Rebekah is the daughter of Bethuel, but what does it call him? An Aramean. Hold on. Wait, what? We've not had Arameans involved in this before. They've all been the direct descendants of Abraham, right? That's why Eliezer, the servant of Abraham, went off and tried to find a wife for Isaac from among their own clan. But now we're told that Bethuel her father is Aramean. And you're like, And again, some people would say, aha, see, the Bible's not consistent. In one place it said he's a descendant of Abraham, and another place which was Ur of the Chaldees, right? They're Chaldeans, is who they are ethnically at this point. But yet now he's called an Aramean. But don't worry, there's an easy explanation. So, here we have the lineage from Terah, the father, to Abraham, and then some of the children. So here we have Rebekah. That's who we're talking about. Her father is Bethuel, who is the son of Nahor and Milcah, all related directly to Abraham. Those are his brothers. Haran and Nahor are at this point. Let's see, I think I have one more. And then we also will mention Laban, her brother, because he comes up a lot, because that's where Jacob gets his wives, is from Laban. See, Leah and Rachel down here. But yet we're told they're Arameans. So her father Bethuel is the son of Nahor, Abraham's brother, and Milcah, which is Haran's daughter, who's also a brother of Abraham, Haran is. And we do not know who Bethuel's wife was, for she's not mentioned. Just meaning she's not important at this point in time as to who she is. But I guarantee you she's from within this clan somewhere, because they're all very, you know, back then you want to keep it in the family, and they literally did. Now, you can see that God chose a woman who was very close to Abraham, as in there's no other peoples involved in here yet. They're all from his clan, the family of Terah. Now, even though Bethuel, he's of the same lineage as Abraham, who's Chaldean. So, now all of a sudden we're like, Arameans? What are these Arameans doing in here? Or what does this mean? So, now, why are Bethuel and Laban called Arameans of a place called Padan Aram? That is the question. Does this mean there are Aramean genes in the Israelites? But the short answer is no. Kind of. We'll see in a minute. Now this is Padan Aram. Up there in the white, it's between the Tigris and the Euphrates and what we call Mesopotamia at this point in time. Notice what's up in the top there. Haran. Where did Abraham settle first when they left the Ur of the Chaldees, where Terah, their father, took them? He took them to Haran. He settled there. Only Abraham and Lot left and went down to the land of Canaan. All the rest of the family stayed there and has been growing over the years. It's been over 100 years, right at 100 years by this point. So you can imagine if each of them is having 8, 10, 12 kids and it's been 100 years, there's a lot of their clan living in that area. But the area has the name of Padan Aram. Okay? And that should start cluing us into what's going on here. So this is the area that eventually becomes called Aram, which is the same area. And what would you be if you lived in Aram? An Aramean, absolutely. So nothing ethnically has changed. It's no different than when, first and second generation children of immigrants to America, they might be Polish, they might be Russian, they might be German, but the first generation of kids, what are they called? Americans. Same thing. They're called Arameans because of the area in which they live, even though they are not ethnically an Aramean at that point in time. So they would be called Arameans. But it's interesting how the Bible makes this little shift because of the fact that this area is going to be called Aram, and the people there will be called, and so they're going to be the ones that become known as the Arameans during this time. And that people group lasts for a long time in this time. So, where am I? Now, later, other lineages are introduced into the line of Israel, which is interesting. Because all along, God tells them, only marry other Jews, only marry within your own, and especially don't marry a Canaanite, doesn't he? All right. But these other lineages do get added. I love God's sense of humor. Right into Jesus' lineage, who does he put? He puts Rahab, the Canaanite prostitute. Like most people would consider the worst of the worst. Not only is she a Canaanite, the hated people, she's a prostitute. That's what she does for a living. And yet God puts her into the direct lineage of Jesus. He also, just a couple generations later, introduces Ruth of Moab, the Moabitess. And this has much greater meaning. This is the part I was talking about before that has to do with the New Testament. The Old Testament is a shadow of what is to come, a type, a forerunner. Not the actual thing, but the shadow of the thing. Looks like it, but it's not exactly it. That's what it means with the Bible. When you'll hear scholars or books say this is a type of something to come, that's what it means, a shadow, a foreshadowing. It's similar, but not the real thing yet. It's just a foreshadowing of it. So, in the beginning, Israel. That's God's physical kingdom. God has two kingdoms right now. A physical kingdom on earth called Israel. The spiritual kingdom called Christians. And the two are different. And they have different purposes. God chose Abraham. He specifically created the nation of Israel to be the people to carry his name and his existence and his power to the rest of the world. That was supposed to be their job. They didn't do their job. Instead, they abandoned God and followed all the other gods. But they were supposed to live in a manner that would draw the rest of the world to God. Okay? And at that point in time, it seemed like the kingdom was only for Abraham's lineage. Now, unfortunately, the Jews grabbed onto this idea and never let it go no matter what. And yet, the point is that God's kingdom is for everyone, not just for Jews or those who convert to Judaism. So we find later that God begins to insert a few other peoples into his kingdom and into the direct lineage of Jesus. And there's a real point to that. That's why there's a reason God does this. Rahab, Canaanite, and when God had commanded the Israelites not to marry with the Canaanites, yet he makes an exception here and allows Rahab to marry into the family of Israel. Okay? Then a couple of generations later, we come to Ruth the Moabitess, who marries Boaz, a Jew, which is a descendant of Rahab. And this is directly in the line of Jesus. Only God would put a Canaanite prostitute in the lineage of Jesus. God in human form on the earth, So what God is saying is his kingdom will be made up of both Jews and Gentiles. That's the point here. It's not just Jews. It's Jews and Gentiles. There is a reason God tells the Jews to marry within Judaism, to keep their genetics clear. Some have married, but the bulk of them have married within Judaism to create the Jewish people that are to last from the day they were created till the end of time, until Jesus comes back. And so he didn't want to, because if they start marrying other peoples, what will happen? Lots and lots of them. The Jews will disappear. Just like the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Romans, all of those peoples intermarried into other peoples and then ceased to exist as an individual group. And they became part of another group. So God is being very clear, number one, that his kingdom is more than just for Jews. But this is from the very beginning, and yet the Jews missed this part. Because by the time we get down to Jesus, what do they believe? Only Jews go to heaven. End of story. If you want to go to heaven, you got to become a Jew. And that's it. And there is no other way. Yet, that was one of the huge controversies in the early church, was when all of a sudden Gentiles started converting to Christianity. And that's why you had the Judaizers that went around and were a thorn in Paul's side, and many people's sides would go around and say, well, yes, you can be saved by faith in Christ, but first you have to become a Jew and you have to keep the law. And you'll notice in a lot of his writings, that's what Paul's fighting against constantly. The law is not the thing that gets us close to God. It's Christ. And so he deals with that constantly. And why God chose a Pharisee of Pharisees to be the one to carry the message to the Gentiles, because he's the one that knows the Old Testament extremely well. And then, and it tells us even that when he first starts his ministry, he goes into the synagogue and he argues with the synagogue leaders, proving that, number one, Jesus is the Son of God, and number two, Gentiles are a part of the kingdom. And so what did they do in almost every case? Did they agree with him and say, great, Paul, we love that? No. They beat him up and threw him out. In fact, if you go back and remember, in the very beginning of his ministry, it got so bad, the disciples had to lower him out the window on a rope to get him outside a city because they had made a pact to kill him. And if you go look at that, talk about somebody that should suffer depression. You just started your ministry. We who are pastors think, my church isn't growing all that well. How terrible. At least nobody's wanting to kill you. Hunt you down and kill you, and they're not beating you and throwing you into the streets and all that kind of thing. So we see it right here in the very beginning. Now, I believe that God chose a prostitute, Rahab the prostitute, because of what he knew would come down the line with us Christians. We get so moral and so high on our moral horses that we would look down on a prostitute. Oh, they're beneath me. They're a prostitute. Oh, they're people of low morals. And on it goes, that type of thing. And so that's why, remember, what did God tell us about judging others? And that's why he put it right in the lineage of Jesus. He's like, I wouldn't say that if I were you, because think about it.
So what did he say about judging?
He said, don't judge anyone.
Anybody.
You have
Whoever-
no right to
When
judge.
we judge somebody, we're in the wrong.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the,
Yeah, exactly.
there is no level of sins, but I mean, it's one of the worst sins in the Bible is judging others.
A lot of people don't realize that.
Who's beeping?
That's from you.
Probably.
No, it was him.
No, I think.
I was going to take a picture. That,
Oh.
It's all his fault.
See, I think it's my camera, because you know how it goes with the camera. I'm waiting for it to shut off here in a second, or go blank or something. So, I believe really that, like I said, God has intent in everything he does. Always remember that. He never does anything just because. There is no coincidence. There is no accident. Everything is because of God's plan that was made when? Before the earth was formed. That plan was set in place, and it will not be changed in any way, shape, or form.
You know, there's something about, if you don't mind, something about judging. It is, it's like, I think when we do that, we don't recognize it most of the time because it makes us think that we're better than somebody else.
Oh,
And
that's
so
the whole point of
it's a
judgment.
false experience.
It's funny how we humans, how we find our level in life is somebody beneath us. That's been human since the beginning of time. It's even funny, where do wealthy people generally live in a town
On
if
the
it has hills?
Yeah.
Where?
hill.
The top.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I come from the mining industry. And you can go down to the town of Bisbee, and they actually have what's called Miners Row. And what it is the houses go down both sides of a street, and it goes up a hill. And the plant superintendent lives there, and by rank, you live farther and farther down the hill. So when you got promoted, you actually moved to a bigger, nicer house. And you go to any mine anywhere, and that's how it always works. The superintendent, the owner, lives on the top of the hill, and everybody lives where? Beneath them. Even when you talk to people about sinning, I've said this before, we can always point to somebody and say, I'm okay because they're worse than me. And I said, if that was, that's what a lot of people use who aren't Christians to say they're going to get into heaven. Okay.
But what about people that go to court? The judge.
That's different.
Because
That's criminal. That's law. And I'm going to get there in just a second. Bible tells us we are fully allowed to judge what someone does, their actions, like breaking the law.
totally.
We can't judge their person. Like we could say a prostitute is doing something that is wrong and bad for her. We can't say she's a bad person. See, that's the difference. We can judge, and this is where Christians, I think, get really confused, where they don't judge. It's like, you can judge their actions. The Bible commands us to judge actions, our own and others. But it also tells us that we can't judge the person. We do not know a person's heart. We do not know their circumstances, that type of thing.
Even judging the actions can get a little swayed.
Well-
it's like, what I'm saying is, if somebody kills somebody, you judge that action to kill somebody. But because they're acting a little different than you and you're judging them because of their actions, that's all in your head. And that's,
Well,
to me, that is sick.
But again, we can't take their actions and say that makes them a certain kind of person.
That's what I'm saying.
No, we can't do that. We can only judge the action. Like, what happens so often is the church says homosexuality is wrong. But then too many Christians act like there's something wrong with the person and condemn the person, not the act. And that gets us into a lot of trouble, not the lifestyle, that type of thing. Is it wrong? Absolutely. The action is wrong. The person, that's God. In fact, God said there's only one allowed to judge. The only one who's been both God and man. Jesus. He knows us. He's been tested in every way we can be tested. So that's the only thing that makes him a proper judge for us, because he knows exactly what we're going through. And yet, so it says he's the only one allowed to judge people. Like I told you many times, the great joke about heaven is, you'll be surprised who is there. A bunch of ex-prostitutes. You'll be surprised who isn't there. People you thought were really spiritual. And what's the most surprising thing of all? You're there. That type of thing. So we have to be very careful of that. And it's a fine line sometimes to separate, and it's easy for us to kind of drift into judging the person. And we have to be so careful of that. There's also, what did God say? With the measure you judge, you'll be judged. Anybody want that? I don't. Absolutely. I want to be judged by God by his measure. Because he has mercy and all that good stuff, Too often we don't. So I think that's why God put a prostitute in the lineage of Christ, you know. And most people would think of, and most Christians will think of prostitutes as second-class citizens. You know, they're criminals. They live in the bad part of town. They're drug addicts. And all that's true. That has no saying about who they are or anything of that nature. So, now, those people that do that, that look down on people like that, the joke's on them because their very savior came from a prostitute. So, just think of it. No Jesus? No prostitute? No Jesus. No Rahab? No Jesus. Because he's directly from her lineage. No Ruth? No Jesus. Now, she wasn't anything immoral, you know, but she was a Moabite. And actually, the nation of Moab gets condemned by God, Ammon and Moab, and he wipes them off the face of the earth because of the way they treated Israel. She's a Moabite, and yet this enemy of Israel becomes the lineage of Christ at the same time. So, and again, remember how God commands us not to judge others. So, how is this linked to Jesus in the New Testament? Which is what I said early on. So think about the New Testament and the kingdom and how the church, and how it came into existence. Who did Jesus preach to specifically and only? Jews or Gentiles? Jews. Everybody he talked to, there might have been Gentiles in some of the crowds, but he came for the Jews. Remember, there's even a Gentile woman that comes to him and wants him to help her, and he said, what do we have to do with you Gentiles? And she says, even a dog gets the scraps off the table, you know, type of thing. And that's the whole point of that, is to point out that the kingdom is for both Jews and Gentiles. Okay, so originally it was for only the Jews. And Jesus only preached to Jews. It wasn't until later that we began to find Gentiles coming into the kingdom. And then in a very short period of time, what happened? What happened to the church as far as Jew and Gentile? Was it predominantly Jewish or Gentile? Gentile. In a very short period of time, the Jews were far outnumbered, and the Jews turned against the church. They were kind of for it in the beginning, and then they turned against it, and that's why to this day the religious Jews are against Christianity. They see Jesus as a traitor and a rebeller and all that kind of stuff. Not as we do. Not even as a prophet or anything like that. So it's not until later that the kingdom is open for all people. So you see that it's following the exact same path we find in the Old Testament laid out. Originally, only the descendants of Abraham. And not too far down the line, all of a sudden we add in Moabite, Canaanite, and some others to show that the kingdom is for both the Jews and the Gentiles. The earthly kingdom was made up of both, and the spiritual kingdom is made up of both for all people. Okay? I thought I already had that up there. So, the first Gentile convert to the spiritual kingdom of God was this guy Cornelius. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion of what was known as the Italian cohort, a devout man who feared God with all his household, gave alms generously to the people, and prayed continually to God. This guy's a Gentile, you know, yet he is totally for God and worships only God. He's not a proselyte. He's not a convert to Judaism. And there were a lot of these. If you understand this, you'll understand a lot more about the New Testament. There were quite a few Gentiles who did not convert to Judaism, but who were interested in the one true God. And they would go to the synagogue and they would treat the Jewish people extremely well. And there was a large group there, and that's why the church grew so fast in the Gentile world. Because they already believed in God. Look at how they're the transition people. God always works things through transition. Because humans don't do well going from A to Z. They do better if they go A, B, C, D. You know, we don't handle big change well. We handle small changes much easier. And so what God does is he goes through a process. And what he does is he goes from it being all Jewish, but then you've got all these Gentiles that come that are God-fearers. That's usually what they're called, God-fearers, God-worshippers, but they're Gentiles. They're not tied into the Jewish worship system. They don't go to the temple, so they're not stuck with all that. So they're the easiest to convert when you think about it. And they're the ones that convert because they see Jesus, they believe he's the Son of God, and then they convert. over to Christianity, and it's why they become the bulk of the church very quickly. Within just a few years, it's predominantly Gentile during that time. And so God makes that transition for them to more easily ease it into the Gentile world as well as the Jewish world. There was something else about that that's important that was in my head, but I kept talking and now it's gone. Something very important, and hopefully it will come back to me. It's about the Jews and the God-fearers. Oh, this is stuff that drives me insane, you know. Remember what Jesus tells the disciples, the fields are wide unto harvest?
Yes.
Okay? And that's used all the time to motivate us to do evangelism. And we miss the rest of what he says. He says, the field is wide unto harvest. Look, the hard work has already been done. He's not telling them it's their job to go out and get Gentiles or others into the kingdom. That's been taken care of, and that's fulfilled. You don't understand what that means until you learn about the God-fearing Greeks and Gentiles. That's what he meant. God's already been at work. He's drawn all these Gentiles as God-fearers so that when Jesus came along, they'd be the ones that would immediately turn to Christ and build the church. And then spread it throughout the world. The hard work has already been done.
That's cool.
See, it's not really our job to go out and bring people to Christ. It's our job to go out and reap the harvest God has already grown. And that's a different mindset that we really need to be aware of. God, what does the Bible say? God is always at work, doesn't it? He's always at work. He's always preparing. And he's already touching lives, and then he connects us to him to be part of the harvest. Because God did all the hard work ahead of time for us. And then a whole lot of stuff in the New Testament begins to make a lot more sense. So we got Cornelius, the centurion. We don't know how he came to God. We don't know what motivated him. All we know is, and see, he's like the hardest of the hard. He's a centurion. They were like the sergeants of the army. The sergeants are the backbone of the army. The officers, they don't get shot at. The privates don't know a whole lot. It's the sergeants that do the bulk of the fighting and, you know, keeping the men going and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Even in the technical world, which I was in, the sergeants are still the ones that know everything. That train the new guys and get the work done and all that kind of stuff. They're the backbone. That's what a centurion was. He was the same type of position. And so these guys were the hardest of the hard. I mean, we know how brutal the Romans were. You know, they were super brutal in battle into each other and all that type of thing. And yet this guy, not only does he worship God, but he's a devout man, feared God and all his household. He's converted his entire household to worshiping God. All of his slaves and servants and so on and so forth. And we also find that he sends some of his soldiers to go. Remember, this is the first time Peter's told to go preach to the Gentiles. Remember, he's asleep on the roof. God lets down the sheet with all the unclean animals, and God says, Peter, get up and kill and eat. Oh, no, Lord. He thinks it's some kind of trick. You know, you're trying to fool me into eating something that's not right. God says, kill and eat. Never, Lord, I have never eaten anything other than, you know, what your word commands us to. And then God says, I'm paraphrasing, don't you dare tell me, the one who made the rules, that you're not going to. Kill and eat. And so then he wakes up. And then he's also told that a man is coming to him. So men are coming to him and go with him. And he doesn't know who it is or why. And so two of his soldiers come, they get Peter, they take him to Cornelius, and the whole house gets saved. But also shows us that a lot of his soldiers were God worshipers because of his example. And they also get saved during that time. So it's amazingly interesting. So now, so what we're seeing here is all this stuff with this whole Aramean issue and the Moabites and all of that is to show us that the kingdom was never meant to be just for the Jews and that's it. They're the beginning of the kingdom, the foundation of the kingdom. In fact, the city of Jerusalem in heaven, what does the Bible say are the foundations of it? The Jews and the apostles. The Old Testament and the New Testament are the foundation of the city of God. And that's, again, this picture that's being painted. Let's see. So, now, this was also prophesied by Isaiah. And that's why it's so amazing that the Jews during Jesus' time had to basically just close their eyes and pull out parts of their scripture and ignore it because the Bible is very clear. It says, "Thus says the Lord, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth and what comes from it, who gives breath to the people on it and spirit to those who walk in it. I am the Lord. I have called you in righteousness. I will take you by the hand and keep you. I will give you as a covenant for the people, a light for the nations." That's a prophecy about Jesus. That's who God is talking to, his servant, Jesus. And he's a light for the nations. In the Bible, nations always means the non-Jewish peoples. And that means all of them on the earth. Therefore, the nations, for everybody. Also notice, whenever God wants to say something that's enormously important and powerful, not always, but many of the times, he starts with creation. What does he say here? "Thus says God the Lord, who created the heavens and stretched them." See, it always speaks of his enormous power, to create everything from nothing. We need to know that because of what he's going to tell us next. This Savior, this man God that's going to come to earth. That's a big thing. And so when Peter goes to the Areopagus and he's dealing with the Greek philosophers, how does he start? I see you have this statue to an unknown God. Let me tell you who that unknown God is. He created everything that exists. Where does Paul go? Creation. And you'll find it all through the Bible. That's what God will use to express his ultimate power. Because think of it. It's the ultimate thing he did in things that we can understand. He created everything from nothing. We still can't wrap our heads around that. We cannot create nor destroy anything. All we can do is change its shape or change its energy, one form of energy into another. That's it. We can neither create nor destroy. We can only modify. And so in Isaiah 49:5 it says this, "And now the Lord says, he who formed me from the womb," again this is about Jesus, "to be his servant." Now, formed me from the womb to be his servant. How more specific can you get than that? Because who got Mary pregnant? God. He literally formed him from the womb to be a servant, to bring Jacob back to him, to bring the Israel back to God. That was Jesus, one of his purposes. And that Israel might be gathered to him, for I am honored in the eyes of the Lord, and my God has become my strength. He says, this is what God says, "It is too light a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to bring back the preserved of Israel. I will make you as a light for the nations, that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth." How can the Bible get any more clear and specific than the Messiah was to bring Gentiles into the kingdom? It's very clear. But the Jews have never, ever accepted that. Other than, I guess their mindset is that they're all going to convert to Judaism and then come into the kingdom. But yet you'll notice God puts that upon Jesus to do it through his kingdom, the spiritual kingdom. Not the physical kingdom. Oh, I haven't been looking at the clock, and I'm looking at my notes going, well, I may run out of notes, and then it's like 1 minute to 10. So, I want to add one more thing. Look at verse 21, because I find this interesting. You got a minute or so here. I think I'm still recording. "And Isaac prayed to the Lord for his wife, because she was barren. And the Lord granted his prayer, and Rebekah his wife conceived." Now, here's the thing. I can't remember if I have this as a... Who chose Sarah for Abraham? God. Who chose Rebekah for Isaac? He's not very good at it because he picked two barren women. That's who God picked. Neither one of them could have kids, right? Why would God do that? Why does he keep choosing sterile women? Because what does it show? His power, yeah. You know beyond doubt that this child is because of God's power, because these women couldn't have kids. And then all of a sudden they do. And it's because of God's power. Why do you think Mary was pregnant before having a relationship with a man? God's power. See how the Old Testament foreshadows the New Testament. It is only by God's command and power that we have Israel, and it's only by God's command and power that we have Jesus and Christianity. Okay, we'll stop there. That's close.
Yeah, then she has twins.
What?
Then she has twins.
Yeah. Who? How would you ladies like this? They're not just kicking, they're wrestling in there.
Yeah.
And she even goes, "What is going on in here?"
Yeah.
You know?
Already fighting.
Pregnancy's already uncomfortable enough. Imagine two of them rolling around in there. You know?